not a whole lot of transition time, as you guys all know, right? I mean, not like you have a whole bunch of time to reflect back on Saturday night and spend a ton of time dwelling upon it. But obviously, you gotta you gotta go about what you're doing and correct a lot of things. And it was tough. But as you look back at it, the thing that it comes down to is execution and execution in the fourth quarter, and then making plays. And kind of like I probably said after the game, that they made more plays than we did, and in those situations, especially as it came down late in the game, those ones are the critical ones, and they're not like plays out of the ordinary. It's plays that come along with execution, and plays that come along with being poised enough throughout that entire game to be able to anticipate some of those things. And as you look back at it, that's where, to me, I'd say they did a better job. In some ways, maybe the end of the game we were got wore down a little bit defensively, and I think that in the long run cost us. And so that's one of those things where we've talked about we got to play more guys. We have the ability to make sure that we're playing 24 guys of some sorts, and I mean that in a significant some version of a significant role. That's not just one play here on dime on 3rd and 8, but the ability to make sure that we're going to put ourselves in a position come the fourth quarter to be able to execute and do the things because guys are fresh enough mentally and physically. But that just doesn't happen, right? It's got to be deliberate in what you're doing, and that has a lot to do with the week's preparations as well. So, not a whole lot of time, right? You have a night game. I mean, it turns over pretty quick, and now we got to move on. And that was probably the biggest message on Sunday, is our ability to kind of regroup, and reload, because we got to get rolling. And so they did that. Did a good job on Sunday night. We're able to run around out there. Today, obviously, is a normal Monday, and it'll get back and tomorrow and make sure we're getting to the physicality of what it is that we need to do, and knowing what it's going to be like going over to Iowa and playing another night game. It's going to be a tough, hard-fought, physical football game that, in a lot of ways, probably going to come down to the fourth quarter.
Luke, I don't know how much time you got to spend with Tweed during that portal process. I know you say it often goes very quickly, but how eager did you sense that he was for this opportunity to come to Wisconsin, what he could do, especially knowing his situation at Oklahoma where he wasn't a scholarship player and he was going to get that chance here?
Yeah, no, I mean, it didn't take long to figure that out once you got him here. But again, you don't have a ton of time, right? I mean, I don't even know if there was maybe a minute or 2, 3 phone call before he actually came to campus. But you assess a lot of things when they come to campus. How important is this to them? How important is this place? Would this place be to him? You're speculating a lot of things. But for an older guy that came with his family, I thought that was a really good sign, that this wasn't just something he was looking to maybe collect a couple bucks and go another place and play, but a place that he really wanted to have an opportunity to get what he deserves. And I don't mean that as like he was handed anything, that he knew walking in the door that there was going to be a room full of guys, which in any really good program there better be, but that he was going to have some opportunities, between older guys and younger guys, to have a chance to, establish himself. And like I said, you like to think you had an idea, but there's some little tells in the short amount of time that he was here as a, so to speak, recruit for 24 hours.
Luke, I wanted to follow up from a statement you made Saturday, was saying that this group isn't, quote, there yet in terms of tipping your hat off to Penn State, saying that this group was able to pick up this in this situation. How does a program, how does a team get to a point of, picking each other up? What are the steps to take?
I'm not sure exactly what you're picking each other up. I think that if there's one thing that not one thing. There's one of the things that these guys do a good job of is picking each other up. I mean, they do have a strong bond and commitment in that locker room, and in different ways at times. But it's not like it's a crew that's going to point fingers at each other. I mean, they all have their ups and downs, and things don't go their way, whether it's individually or as a team. I would say in the year and a half, some of the better things that we've done is those guys' ability to be honest with each other, and make sure that they're picking each other up and understand they got each other's back. And that's the way we're going to have to do it. I think the thing that I'm alluding to is that's got to be a strength of ours as we continue to build. And I mean build in the sense that in some ways have those guys that we saw across the ball, maybe our first, second, third round picks on a consistent basis, as well as, those guys that you got 23, 24 guys that you truly feel like you can play a significant amount of reps to and time to in games. And I think that's how we want to and need to continue to build the things that we're doing in a program. And yeah, it can happen quick. It can happen faster. There's a lot of things that go along with it, but that's where we're still growing.
I was they run the ball really well, have a really good back. I'm just wondering your thoughts on how do they challenge a defense in terms of trying to contain that?
Well, it's not things that you see every single week. I think that's where they have become more unique. As people would say, hey, they haven't changed a lot. Well, they haven't, but a lot of the game around them has, and so it makes even what they do now, I think, a little bit more unique than the things that they did 8-10 years ago, because there were more people within the Big Ten in particular that were similar in what they did, and they're the ones that have kind of stuck to their guns and continued to thrive in doing what they believe is best. So I think that's the uniqueness that they pound the football, but their ability to boot it, their ability to be consistent, and their ability to stick to what they're doing, I think goes a long way with what it is that they do as well.
Let's say, Luke, with someone like A.J. Blazek who comes in and with the offensive line in this past offseason, talking to a few of the offensive linemen, it sounds like he caters his coaching style to each player and whatnot. Just what have you seen from him and how he coaches the offensive line and each of its members and how it's paid off early on?
Well, I think he starts with he's a relationship guy, and anytime you're a new guy walking in the door, that votes well for you. But sometimes that also means it takes time. It has a lot to do with the type of kids that you have, and I think our guys are relationship type guys, and probably one of the reasons they came here, obviously, because this place has always been about people. It's always been about relationships, and I know they've had a few O-line coaches in the last 5 years. So I think in some ways, that's given them, some opportunities to grow too. The individuals we were talking about, Jack or even Riley, who's been here for 4 or 5 years. So I think all those things kind of add together. And as you get into those stretch of things, as you get into those tougher times in the season, which later in the season is always a tougher times, especially for big guys because it's physical. There's no, two ways about it, right? I mean, no matter who you're playing, it's going to be a physical football game up front. We talk about that and we start camps, right, in spring football. It's not padded practice yet, but it is for the guys up front. And I think so that relationship, that understanding each and every guy a little bit different, gives them a chance to continue to grow, because I think he's smart enough to be able to protect them during the week based on what it is that they need. And if he didn't have a relationship, if they weren't honest with him, I think that's where it becomes a little bit more difficult, especially when you're new. So I think he's done a really good job in that sense.
Coach, you mentioned some of the players, and not being able to rotate maybe as much. How tough is it to balance giving guys like Nazir nearly the entire game or Jake Chaney nearly the entire game with rotating that, knowing that it's such a close game and you want your top players out there?
There's a balance, and that's what I mean. If you don't do it early and if you don't have a plan for it, it makes it more difficult as you get into the game, because there's a feel for a game too, and there's times when guys roll too much, right? We had that a little bit at the tailback position where we thought that we were playing 4 different guys, and that rotation, where it might keep people fresh, also doesn't allow them to get into a rhythm. So I think you got to know your guys, and you got to know the dynamics of the game and the physicality of the game, but you got to have a plan, and I think that's probably the thing. If you don't see guys rotating, and sometime in the first 3 series, it's probably not something that's in the plan, and if that's the case, it is the case, right? There's often situations, obviously, at the offensive line that's one of them. But I think as you get down the stretch, that's where you see some of the things that can add up on you, and you got to know who can handle it. I've had guys in the past that, one guy in particular was a defensive lineman. If he played 80 snaps, the first and second one were no different than 78 and 79. But then you've also had guys that anything over 40 snaps, there's a significant difference in how they play and the effort to which they play with. So it has a lot to do, like we talked about, with those relationships, to understand your players as well.
Luke, I wanted to follow up about the run game a little bit from Iowa. The stretch run was something that you said that you guys were struggling with early on in the season. That's been Iowa's bread and butter for a long time. Do you feel like you're better against that concept now?
We'll find out on Saturday. I think there's been weeks that we've done a better job. I think that I think that was one of those things early in camp that was a little bit new for our offense, a little bit more in some of the stretch game and the mid-zone game that made it sometimes a little bit more difficult. But I think we've seen a little bit more of it this year, and we've done a better job with it. None of which that run it as well as Iowa or as often as Iowa, so it'll definitely be a challenge.
Coach, you've talked a lot over the last couple of years about the importance of rivalries. Iowa's won 2 straight in this series for the first time in like 15 years. Just does that add any emphasis, and what is it going to?
Yeah, just another thing to add upon the significance of these things, right? We don't go. We don't lose sight of those things, right? I know that the Big Ten has grown incredibly, and there's a lot of mountain to climb in this league, and it's still not changing how important some of those rivalry games are. And it's just, again, you get in the midst of it, and it's something you talk about in camp. It's something you spend a night on in camp, and then you sometimes, I don't say you forget about it, but you kind of put it off the side because, the nature of the schedule that you have. But then when the week comes up, that there's definitely a little something extra, and those guys understand it. And a majority of our kids, are from this general area, right in the 300-mile radius. I'd say a good 50-60% of our kids, so they understand that. They probably had been recruited at some point in time by Iowa as well, and so they know not just the history, but they know a lot more about that place as well. So I think those kinds of things that add up to make what rivalries really are.
You've talked about keeping a quarterback room and the challenges of that in today's day and age, and just wanting to develop from within overall. And it may be tough in the season, but where do you think you're at in terms of the development of that quarterback room and what future can hold there?
How do you know, right? You've seen Tyler Van Dyke for 2 games or two games and a quarter, or not even. Obviously, you've seen the most out of Braden. And you've seen nothing really else other than a couple snaps from Mabry. So to say what the development is like is hard, And so it's an ongoing, constant thing. And, you can never have enough, and the depth is always going to probably be an issue until maybe you can truly think you can build from within. But with that being said, it's even harder because you get a talented guy and not a whole lot of people want to sit. And so I'd like to say that I do see a progression in what they're doing. We're out there every single day, and I sit in the quarterback room, and you can definitely hear a progression of what they're doing, whether it's Braden or Mabry. But those kinds of things, until you get a chance to get out there and do it, are really hard to have a great idea of what it is that you got. And not that I've been doing it as long as Coach Ferentz or anything like that, but it's always going to be one of those positions that's going to be quite unique. Every position, you got to see guys do it, but that's the one position and there's a lot of things that you would have no idea that are going to happen when they get in there. And just in the short amount of time I've been a head coach, that's the things I've probably recognized as much as anything. A guy like we had Desmond Ritter, who was a quarterback for 4 years, but you talk about a development of what he looked like as a first-year guy to a fourth-year guy as to what he looked like as a high school kid that nobody probably would have taken. There's such a margin there that it's hard to pinpoint exactly what that is at that age. It's just something you got to constantly be doing.
Look, we've seen a couple of games with Hunter Wohler being your primary punt returner. Have you liked what he's given you at that spot? Do you think he's added some stability there?
He has. He gives you an opportunity. Obviously, he's a sure-handed guy, but he's also a very aggressive guy. And I think we're seeing some other opportunities that could be there for him. And like I told you before, there's not a spot that if we had to have something that you wouldn't put Hunter in, right? You get limited at quarterback, and I'm sure Hunter could go in there and give you some snaps at quarterback and do a darn good job at whatever that is. And he's just one of those guys that's got that kind of versatility. But we got to be smart because we also don't want him in there 85 snaps a game, and he's playing obviously pretty much every snap on defense, and everywhere else we use him does take a toll.